Here with Keiken, with Tanya and Hannah, from the trio that are Keiken, and we're here for the MetaArt Club, and it's such a pleasure to meet you both. I'd just like to ask, if I may, of you both, where are you currently located? Because I know that between you, the three of you, you're in Berlin and also in London.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So I'm in London and Penny's in Berlin.
Yeah, I'm in Berlin.
Who's not with us today, she's also in London.
Okay, amazing. And how did you kind of form your collective?
It started a long time ago. We've been actually working together as Keiken since we were in our fine art degree at Falmouth University, which was about, was it 6 years, Hannah? Can't remember.
Yeah, I think we started we didn't necessarily make any big works with each other, but we started working or as
collaborating
practice. Yeah, around 2014, 15. Yeah. And it was really cute because I don't think any of us really, I think maybe Izzy came up with the idea of let's start a collaborative practice with one another. But as soon as we started, we just, for some weird reason, took it really seriously. More seriously than anything we took in our lives. And it was really cute. One day we went to Izzy's house and there was this, she had this really weird bedroom that had flamingo wallpaper. So the flamingos were is it flamingo? Yeah, the right way. And it's absolutely massive bright pink room, and we spent a day just drawing a spider diagram connecting our practice together. And then we came to the conclusion that the thing that connected us together was the word experience, and whether that's to do with consciousness or whether that's to do with pushing the boundaries of experience and making work that's immersive or interactive. So that's kind of, yeah, and it's always really been at the forefront of everything that we do.
Yeah, it's kind of actually quite I guess it's interesting, but it's also fortunate for us that that it's remained something that's still very much at the heart of how we approach doing things and at the heart of how we make our work. Because I think if we because Keiken means experience in Japanese, if we'd have swayed away from that, we'd have to undergo a whole new evolution.
Yeah. I mean, that's so interesting. And Hannah, your Japanese origin. So were you the one that kind of said, "This is what this means to me"? It's a cool name.
No. The girls just went away. Yeah, the girls went away and they thought about it together and they came back to me and were like, "Hey, I think we should call it Keiken." And then I was like, "Okay, that's a great name." And yeah, so it just kind of, actually they came up with it, not me.
We were
good. I didn't get to have to come up with a collaborative. I didn't have to come up with a name. Yeah, I think we also just liked it because it sounded very sweet. The name, it sounds like a nice name. So I think that it's just kind of funny how you just randomly come up with an idea and how it just actually changes everything that you do for so many years now.
Yeah, I mean, to me the name is a real signifier of you, and then the work, your artwork is a real signifier of the three of you, and what you really incredibly unique and ahead of its time. And I wanted to ask you, it's interesting for me to hear you say it's sweet, because obviously I live in Hong Kong, where the MetaArt Club has been founded, and we're obsessed here with everything Japanese and kawaii. But to me, Keiken doesn't convey kawaii, it conveys kind of serious credentials in the art world, and what you're trying to do, and the mechanics of how you go about it are very, very deliberate, and very carefully considered. So there's nothing whimsical about it. but your work is really beautiful. So I just wanted to ask you, how do you work collaboratively? Obviously, you work from London and Berlin, but how do you kind of practice as a trio of artists under the Keiken moniker?
It's through lots of mistakes. So I think one thing that's really helped us over time is we looked a lot at like world building and how to create worlds. So like when we, not only within our work, we really focus on worlds and the metaverse, we also like within the way that we operate, we really realized over time when we started to work with lots of people, it's not just about you as a collective, but it's also you as an individual. So what a world building allows both the collective and the individual to operate both autonomously and collectively. And particularly,
Okay.
like, for example, it's like us as a three, because we're the founders, we always felt like, oh, this is ours, and we just don't mind not having a personal practice. But actually, we work with lots of collaborators, and because because we are the founders, they never feel like it's fully theirs, and we didn't really understand that at the beginning. We just wanted to share it with everyone, and we wanted to involve as many people. And over the years, we realized that we need to be able to have this like very open source way of working, where collaborators can come in and we can do something collectively, learn from one another. Our practices might slightly change because of one another, but we also nurture their practice and respect and understand they have their own personal journeys. And I think that's really helped us, because that's a very organic way of working. It's a bit like, how cells work. Like cells, they tend to like come together and then come apart, and they separate and they unfold and they come back together. So for us, it's really important to have that very fluid structure and malleable way of working. So that's kind of how we started, like that's really how we've like really focused and like formed a way of collaboratively working that is healthy and is malleable. So yeah, that's kind of how we started to form it. I think another huge part of our practice was learning stuff like trans-authorial narratives. So being able to create narratives that the author is multiple people. So that's like a very direct and easy way of like, you become the like story giver, or you become the kind of gods of the worlds that you're creating. Like you get to be the architect. So using trans-authorial narrative was a very good way of focusing our work in a way that we all feel like we are part of it. And it's super lovely, because now it's like when we write with one another, you can hardly tell who wrote what. Like you can't tell who wrote what, and often we can't remember who wrote what either.
Yeah,
Wow.
and I think also, just to kind of add to that in a kind of slightly different vein, I think over time and after working together very closely with one another for such a period of time, and basically all the time, there basically aren't any breaks, but we really were able to identify kind of like what are our individual strengths, what are our individual interests, and actually individually those things are all quite different. So it means that we can kind of really pull together all our different resources and our different skill sets to be able to actually create something that in a way feels very whole. Like I don't think that I know for myself, if I were to do things individually, it wouldn't feel so, and like the work itself wouldn't feel so rich in detail or ideas, or I think it would just feel quite flat. But I think identifying these things, we were able to kind of I don't know, we have a little metaphor for the way that we see it, but it's kind of like Hannah is the seed, because she's really good at kind of coming up with lots of ideas and really kind of I guess kind of like being almost like the fire at the very beginning. And then my role is a bit more like, I like to do things very orderly and kind of like I like to kind of like sustain things. So the metaphor for me was as being like the stem, but then, or the kind of like the backbone maybe. And then Izzy is actually, she's really good at reflection, and she's really good at the kind of the end part of the process that's really about refining. So we kind of see her as the flower that blossoms after everything, and without we couldn't really operate as Keiken without any part of each other, I think. So yeah, it's like a full cycle.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful way of defining it, Tanya, and defining the interplay between the three of you. And I think, you know, for the collectors and potential collectors who are going to be looking at the MetaArt Club and seeing your work, and obviously you're incredibly highly regarded and, you know, collected in an institutional sense, and you know, we're very grateful to have you as part of the 35 artists that make up the MetaArt Club. You know, your work is very prescient, and I wanted to ask you about that because, you know, 2020/2021 has been, you know, this incredible trajectory for NFTs and digital art, and obviously, you know, shooting into the public consciousness, if you will. But, you know, the three of you have been creating digital art, and you've been, you know, finding your way around the metaverse for some time now, and all of a sudden the metaverse is, you know, expanded consciousness for the man on the street. But this is something that you've been cultivating quite deliberately within your art practice for quite some time. So can you give us an indication of, you know, where that started, and, you know, how your work has evolved in this really unique and incredible way?
So we did a piece called Film My Metaverse in 2019. It was a film installation. The film itself was 35 minutes and made inside a gaming engine. So it's using the same tools that we use to make a metaverse. So for example, we could take the sets out from the gaming engine that we used to shoot in, and you could actually make worlds from them that people could explore. So the film itself was about what would happen if we lived in the metaverse. So it's very much like a kind of sci-fi magic realism film, and it speculated this idea that what happens if the world was rendered uninhabitable due to climate change. And what happened in our film was that Alipay quickly disseminated life units. They didn't know what to do, so they panicked. So everyone had to suddenly live inside these life units in the metaverse and could not exist on the earth. There was only a very few people that could exist on the earth because they could afford to, and they wanted to replenish the earth to make it inhabitable again. And so we really looked at what kind of lives would exist, what sort of problems, what sort of like systemic issues would we bring to the metaverse, and what emancipatory things would we bring to the metaverse. So we explored the lives of, like, there was one world which was called Poem Sector, which was a corporate wellness world, and we also had another world called 068, which was a beta world. And the problem with the beta world was it was so emancipatory. However, the problem was you couldn't earn points to keep your base body alive. So your base body is the body that exists on Earth. So it explored not only like what happens when you go into the metaverse, you're so immersed in it that you forget about your own body, and what happens if you're reliant on it and you make money in the metaverse, but you forget about your own money. So forget about like the body that exists on the earth and how to survive. So it's really trying to explore those like, it's like the world's already complicated, but what happens if you have multiple bodies and you're operating multiple bodies at the same time? There is a interesting futurist called Natasha Vitamour, who we interviewed before we made this film, and she is a transhuman. She's a futurist, but she's really interested in designing transhumanist designs, and she designed the substrate autonomous body, or the platform diverse body, and it was the idea of what happens when you have a body that exists on the earth, but also you could have multiple bodies that exist in different places and the metaverse, or in different platforms. I think at the time she didn't call them metaverse because it's a you know, it was a little while ago, but it was very much this idea of like Web 3.0 and living in these different worlds. And it's interesting because Natasha Vitamour is married to the director of Alcohol, which is where you put your body, when you pass away, you preserve your body in plutonium jelly to be preserved for the future. So she's super into these things. And then we were just really trying to speculate what happens when you go not only into, like, for example, you might go onto a different street and you might feel like that place isn't for you. But what happens if you go into worlds and those worlds are just completely uncatered for you and your needs, but you can't get outside of it, or you can't enter it? So there's a lot of like there's a lot of like problem solving we need to do. I think a lot of our work really encourages having a really philosophical understanding of building these immersive virtual worlds. Like, if they feel as real as the earth does, we're going to get completely lost in it. And if we do, it's like playing, it's not only like playing with fire, it's literally you're creating whole ecosystems in which people live in, and there's an immense responsibility and an immense amount of wisdom and love and nurture and care that's really not like for example, the blockchain is like highly dictated by finance, but the things that make people happy is not highly dictated through finance. There's a lot of things that people need, a lot of basics people need through financial stability, but in terms of like wholeness and feeling complete, in terms of like making people feel interconnected in ways that they did not think was possible, being able to make the world a more equal place for people, that is like a huge challenge, whilst also protecting the earth. So like a lot of our work is not just about like directly, okay, we're going to build a metaverse and we're going to just instantly allow people to like live in this space. A lot of it's like considering what kind of avatars, what kind of technologies, what kind of systems, structures, stories, beliefs are we going to have in that space. So it's very much mapping and planning that out and being able to share that with other people, and also thinking of the technologies that would actually get us to the metaverse too.
Yeah, that's incredible, Hannah. And it's quite dystopian, the reality that you're sharing and that you're exploring with your work. And I think that there's a lot of beauty in that, because you're not just looking at it from an aesthetic point of view and saying, oh, isn't this amazing? We're humanity heading for destruction on the earth, but the metaverse is here to kind of save us all. You're actually questioning the soul and how we will actually exist in this space, and whether it's actually going to be something that's functional for humanity, or what are the ramifications of all of that, because it's not just kind of a trend, and it certainly appears to be that way now. So you've been questioning that before it's become part of the public domain, if you will. And I think that's really, really interesting. How did you develop this understanding of the metaverse, individually Hannah, individually Tanya, and collectively as Keiken? Were you kind of talking about this when you first came together and decided to work together, or were you like, has this gradual knowledge of the metaverse and the potential ramifications of how humanity is going to evolve with the earth going into disarray, have you been kind of developing this narrative, or how has that process worked for you?
I guess it's been quite gradual. Like I don't think there was ever like a decision to kind of follow this kind of like path, but I was just thinking, like, even one of our like very earliest works, Hannah, like Mother Digital, like in that piece, like all the four it was kind of to do with 4 different characters, and most, if not all of them, existed online, if I'm remembering correctly. Yeah. So we were always kind of actually, I mean, I guess maybe it's just like the generation that we belong to. Like, I mean, we grew up with we're not quite Gen Z, but we're yeah, we grew up with the internet. Like being online feels very like native to us. And I think something that we always tend to do with our work is we're kind of like, we're taking a bird's eye view and we're reflecting on the contemporary moment as though it is history. And often, like I think Hannah was saying earlier, like we work a lot in narrative, so we're often kind of like distorting elements of reality, or kind of like flinging them further into the future, but they're actually, everything's very much like grounded in what's actually existing today. So I think actually, Olivia, you said the word prescient earlier about our work, and I think that it maybe has this feeling because even though the narratives that seem quite far away from reality, they're actually not so far.
Absolutely. And I think it's really interesting how you have not just defined yourselves in 3D space and 3D sphere, but you also bring your work into actually kind of the physical sphere. So can you talk about that? There was one work, you know, it's a cyber pregnancy, if you will, and you know, it's very touching to see it and to kind of ponder on what that means, that everyone can carry this child. But you know, can you give us a little bit of an insight into that?
Yeah, so we do a lot of physical like installational work, and that's like, you know, it's also a lot about bridging the gap between the physical and the digital, the phygital. So that's something that's super important to us. And then the piece is called Beta Bodies, and it's a haptic wearable womb. And that womb, we've been programming different things inside it, and we're still kind of developing it. But what we've recently programmed into this womb was animal noises. And what it allowed was allowing people, is basically creating wearable technology that enables you to communicate and collect knowledge and information through your senses, but through different senses to which you typically would do. So for example, it's like we use visual language a lot. So for example, something like Instagram, we're always seeing visual language, or we're always reading things. All these things are like very much using the neocortex, which is the more the newer part of our brain, but it's also the part of the brain that we don't share with other animals. So what we were using was creating wearable technologies that activate different parts of your brain, because when you go into the metaverse, you cannot go into the metaverse and only use your neocortex. If you do that, you're going, like, obviously you cannot only use your neocortex, but if you don't create technologies that simulate other parts of your brain, you'll lose those abilities that you have and those wisdoms. So the technology we were creating was using your senses from your stomach, which often people say that your stomach is your third brain because there's a lot of intelligence there. And we're also using your senses, so you can so the haptics, which haptics are sensors. So you feel the sense of you feel the sounds of the animal's vibrations from your womb, and then you take that data and knowledge and you bring it up your body to your brain to kind of make a judgment, or think about what it may mean or how it feels, or to ponder or observe the animals. So for example, we had the dolphins programmed in, and when dolphins create 3D holographic images through sound, so when you feel it through the womb, you can really feel the sound moving through the womb like this, because that's how sound travels for a dolphin. And because it's getting trapped inside the silicone, the wearable technology, it's also flesh-like, and it's also like being underwater, being underwater is more dense. So kind of when I wore it, I was like, okay, I know what a dolphin looks like, and I know the sound that correlates to a dolphin. So in my head, I think I know what a dolphin sounds like. So I know exactly what a dolphin is, whatever. But when you put it on and you feel and you really observe it and listen to it, because the wearable technology allows you to want to stay there and observe it. And once you're kind of feeling like you're obviously, you don't feel like you are a dolphin now, but you feel much closer to it, and you really feel like it's part of you, and you feel like you're observing the way that it would communicate through their senses. So it's a way of like, we were looking a lot on like the Untitled and how, so like we only see a 10th trillionth of all perspectives that are out there. So we're like, Tan, I don't know if you can explain this bit a little bit better with the Untitled.
Well, it's kind of just like you, Hannah, you were saying, we can only see kind of like 1/10 of a trillionth of what's actually out there, and each, like if you kind of imagine it on like a, what's the word, like almost like a graph, like what we can see might only be on this line, but then every other animal or kind of like physical being exists on like not, sometimes there's crossovers, but often they might actually just be existing on a completely different within a completely different umvelt or a completely different perception of reality. So I suppose that the haptic womb is almost like it can be considered a tool to be able to expand our umvelt and to try and see beyond what we actually know to be true.
Which then goes back into our ideas of the metaverse, and how in the metaverse it's really important that we don't just bring the human unveil into the metaverse, because what you're doing is you're basically creating a humanistic, you're not bringing nature with you, you're not bringing, like creating a CGI tree is very different to the electromagnetic fields, vibrations that you feel when you're under a tree. There's chemical reactions that happen when you are by a tree, and it actually calms you down. And so like all these like organisms that are interacting, that like helps with our like natural like well-being, but also allows us to remind ourselves that we are one. Like it reminds us, like when you're in nature you suddenly feel much smaller, but you feel calmer and you feel like not less important in a way that's like you feel bad about yourself, in a way that you feel content, you feel more like everything is okay. And I think that these sort of things are really important. Like technology can allow us to connect to animals and connect to nature in ways that we don't understand or know. And a lot of big companies like Meta, Facebook are not doing this. They're creating platforms and experiences and metaverses for humans, and we have to be biodiverse. Like that's part of like making humans healthy. So if we take that away, we're taking away a very fundamental element of human beings, and we're also limiting our capacity to grow. We don't want to create a reality that takes away the magic and all the beauty that exists and the ecosystem that is so unbelievably like intricate in ways that we just do not understand.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important, Hannah. And I think the way that you've both explained it is incredibly interesting. And it's something that, you know, I think right now we're, as humanity is very caught up in the metaverse, and it's tied to crypto and it's tied to everything. And you're right, it's absolutely man-made. And the, you know, biodiversity and the bio reality of the metaverse is certainly being ignored. And I think it's, I just think there's an analogy with what you're explaining, and the dolphin analogy of the biohaptic womb that you created, and for example scuba diving. So I know, you know, when you're underwater you're humbled because you're not in your element, because you're reliant on you know, a technology to actually allow you to be there with creatures that are other than yourself. And I think the way that you have you know, that you've articulated technology allowing us to connect to nature and the importance of that is really, really interesting. Can I just ask you, you know, how would you like your art to influence NFT culture? Because your, you know, your work is precursory to what's been happening of late, and it seems like NFTs are obviously the perfect extension to be able to communicate your work to collectors, and that's really exciting. But you know, how how have you been adapting to this new medium for your work?
I think in some ways it's very natural because we're really interested in new technologies. Like it's part of like our own research. It's like we need to understand the blockchain to be able to make predictions on what may or may not happen in the future. So that on a very like research-based way, like that's very helpful. And then in regards to like digital artworks, like that, you know, within the art world, it's not really like there's been like a massive desire for like digital artworks in the same way that it has for like paintings. So, you know, for paintings, there's a very ingrained built system of like its worth. For example, even stuff like how you preserve the digital artworks, like obviously there are like, you know, like Namjoon Park and stuff like that are like very like, you know, people have been preserving their work for a really long time, but it's not quite the same. Like the value of it has always been something that's been like it's like a gamble for a collector because they don't know how to like, they don't know what the worth of the work would be past the death of the artist or past the like preservation of the digital artwork and whether formats change and stuff like that. So the NFT space has definitely allowed for like for example, for us, it makes more sense that we make an NFT than we do a painting because we work in a gaming engine. Like it's like we work with new technologies. It's not really like we're there with oil and a canvas. So that really like makes a lot of sense on that level. And then yeah, I think it's more to do with the like more to do with the research-based thing. I think for like collectors and it's very good to spend time with our work. Like our work is like, it really is like a world. Like we've created so many avatars, so many stories, so many potential technologies that could exist in the world, and you really have to like take your time. And I think it takes a bit of time to like start to process and delve into it, but there's a lot to explore.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that note, you mentioned the collectors and the fact that NFTs are facilitating in-depth interaction with your work in a way that has never really been possible up to now. I mean, obviously they could watch a video, but how could they really kind of see the full layers of the work in the way that you intended it prior to NFTs? So I wanted to ask you, Hannah and Tanya, you know, do you feel that we are living and that you're living as artists in a digital renaissance? And, you know, what does that mean to you? Because obviously a renaissance is kind of a rebirth, and there are you know, there are parallels that we can draw with the Great Plague and what's happened over the last few years. But I don't want to get too dark. But at the same time, from an arts patronage standpoint, it is really interesting the way that NFTs are enabling collectors to cultivate close relationships with artists and the bond that exists now in a way that I think is pretty much unprecedented. And it, you know, what does that say to you as Keiken?
So I just going back to the last question, actually, one of the main things is to do with gamification. That's another really great aspect of it. It really gamifies the experience so things are not so boring. And I think that's like also really, really important. And that's something that we've always like, that's something we really, really like desire and we love, because we love when everything we do is somewhat gamified. So that's really, yeah, so that's really like something really up our street, I guess. And then going back to more the idea of Renaissance and like what's happening, I think we could actually, you know, we were talking about Ion Dumitru.
Oh yeah, it's there's an essay by a Romanian called Ion Dumitrescu, and the essay is called Pre. I hope I'm going to be able to explain it without like butchering it because it's really beautifully written. But it's kind of about the idea that the time that we're living in is the state of Pre, and it's where we've not really, I mean, we're obviously very much coming to the end of something, and that feeling of it coming to an end is very like present in feelings of like kind of like fear and tension. but then actually we're not only just at the end of something, we're also at the beginning of something completely brand new that's also, like you're saying, it's unprecedented, it's completely unknown. And so we're kind of in this like bubble time at the moment, this state of where things are kind of confusing, and perhaps like, I guess there's a lot of like feelings that are bubbling up to the surface. But the essay is really beautiful because it's really talks about how the only way to kind of transition from states is by being able to be flexible and being able to be fluid. And I guess it really talks a lot about queerness and how being like having attitudes of queerness actually allows you to adapt very well. But I think that I feel like that feels quite relevant for this time and for that question that you asked. I can't remember what else I was going to say actually.
Tanya, can I just ask, were you saying pre as in before?
Yeah, like pre is in prefix.
Prefix, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we've oh sorry, did you say?
No, I was just going to say that's really interesting.
Yeah, I think it's like really does sum up what the moment that we're in. So that means that like, because we don't know, we feel like we're no longer, something is about to change, everything bubbles up to the surface. So it actually creates a battleground of emotions. So we see a lot of like polarization, because it's not just to do with like, a lot of people blame the polarization like on the media or something like that, and I think that is very much true. But at the same time, it's actually to do with the space and time that we exist in. So it creates that, it raises it to the surface. And actually, and I think that's like a really great thing to, when you think of a renaissance, it's like, you have to think about how like, so there's a really amazing neuroscientist called Antonio Damasio, and he wrote this book a few years ago called The Strange Order of Things. And he's really like one of the founders of really figuring out how like emotions and feelings connect to one another, and really evolving kind of like the emotional field in neuroscience. And he talks about how the feeling, he argues in this book, The Strange Order of Things, feelings are the nearby beginnings of all culture, and no, feelings are the motivators, monitors, and negotiators of all things, all human endeavor, all things that we build, we create. Everything, it starts from the feelings. So how we create culture is through feelings. So we really have to think of this state that we are in relation to how people feel, because if we create lots of bad negative emotions, lots of fear, it means that we will create a fearful future. So we'll create a very we'll create a lot of borders and structures that are narrow, and we won't allow people to be free because we're too fearful. So a lot of the work that we think about when we think of the Renaissance and stuff like that, we really try to like reflect on it in this very holistic way of like, so how are people feeling, and how do we get people to feel, maybe they feel negative towards things, so how do we make people feel good again? How do you make people feel comfortable? How do you make people feel liberated? Like, these are the things that you need to enable a future that is malleable, because you don't want really harsh structures that don't enable change, because then you don't enable the future to grow. So those are kind of like, yeah, those are kind of the means in which we're trying to like understand this Renaissance and understand the needs for people in the future and understand the metaverse. Because when we create a metaverse, in the metaverses we're creating, we're not creating a metaverse that is like, okay, you're dropping into Decentraland, it's still very clunky, you know, it's hard, not everyone can get online, like you're not fully immersed, you can't smell the grass or anything like that. We're really thinking of it as in Web 3.0, you're fully immersed, it feels as real as the earth. Like we're the sort of metaverse that we're always working on is more on that kind of level of like when it's seamless. So we're trying to figure out how do we get to that point, and what are the needs for humans, and not just the needs of a select group of human beings. We're trying to think about it in a lot of different people and different representations. So that's one of the reasons why also we work with a lot of collaborators. So it's normally not just our voices as a three.
Okay, that's really interesting, Hannah, that you know, you're talking about the needs for humans in the metaverse, and I think that's something that really defines your work, and I think that's why probably it speaks to me so much, because I get completely immersed when I'm looking at some of your works, and I just replay and replay and replay, because there's sound design. It's visually incredibly immersive. It's really beautiful. It reminds me of childhood. You know, there are so many touch points that are meaningful to me, and you know, obviously the thought process that you put into creating your works is incredibly rigorous and very comprehensive, and you're looking at, you know, you're not just looking at the aesthetic, it's about the experiential. And I just wanted to ask you, you know, you talked about you touched on the collectors. Obviously your work is institutionally very highly regarded, so has the NFT space in the last kind of year and a half or so enabled you to come into contact with a private collector that perhaps may not have known about your work? That's certainly, you know, part of our remit at the MetaArt Club, to bring your work and you know, the 35 collective artists that are part of the MetaArt Club to a new group of art collectors who are finding their way within the NFT space, and who are genuinely extremely excited and interested to have that kind of curational experience. But I just wanted to ask you, you know, has this been something new for you?
So we have like made collective friends, and we've made a lot of friends, like, you know, also like some people from the blockchain also collaborate with us now on our work and make the work with us and stuff like that. Yeah, so we just have like friends and have been influenced by them as well. Like, it's really important. Like, it's what's really incredible about this space, because it's so new, the structures are not fully formed, and you're also getting people from different, like people who have very different understandings of the structures that they exist in, and they come and they merge with one another, so they suddenly create this space where, like, okay, so it's a bit chaotic, but at the same time it allows people to be more boundless, it allows people to take risks, it allows people to change their approach or be challenged with the way that they're doing things previously. So that for us is very exciting, and that is it's very important for people. It's important for people to change what they're doing in their life. Like, that's really important. So I think, you know, and also finance affects the way that we maneuver in life. So it's like, yeah, it's just like a massive, it can, like, I think we've not really maybe felt the full potential of it yet, because we very much exist within the art world, and a lot of the works that we're doing are for shows, and we'll do physical work. Like, often there'll be larger works, large scale works. So, but we believe and have a lot of like, yeah, I think it's like, it's still very important to us, and it's like we feel like it's a place to like blossom.
Mm. So do you mean, if I get you correctly, Hannah, do you mean that, you know, your the friends that you've been making and the collaborators you've been making on the blockchain have been sometimes, you know, financially derived, and that has been informing your work to blossom in new ways that were perhaps unexpected?
So more like we actually, like, we have like there's one that's like this, we actually like created an avatar for them, and we would like started to figure out, like, we were looking a lot in, like, I think where he's from, it's like we created the avatar Crypto Keeper, but where he's from, it's like, I think his granddad actually wrote this book about how important Black businesses are, because of his, obviously from his generation, and it was a book that his grandfather wrote, and we spoke a lot about like Black businesses within the metaverse and how important they are, and how like this idea of, previously you have the gatekeeper, but you have like the crypto keeper now, but the crypto keeper actually needs to be the giver. And so, like, for example, we work with him very closely, and actually, like, not only do we have like a lot of conversations with one another, but also because he does like robotic engineering, he actually helps us with our designs, or like we'll implement like within our we'll implement like different blockchain technologies within our like installation, and he'll help us make that happen as well. So he'll almost be like almost like care for us, but also help us with our ideas. So
That's really
yeah, and I think making the avatar of him as the crypto keeper is also, yeah, I can't remember the word, but it's like when you you know, what is the word that's going to really annoy me, when you like, it's kind of like immortalizing him into the metaverse and kind of like propagating everything that he kind of stands for in this relationship as well, I think.
Yeah.
So it's much more like, it's not really like, it's nothing to do with, for us it's not even to do with the financial exchange.
Yeah, no.
It's just to do with like
no.
it's like a collaboration with one another. But it's really great to have somebody who's like comes from a very different perspective, and then we wouldn't have met unless we met on the blockchain, like through the NFTs and having the same interests through that.
Yeah, amazing.
And he's like a collector too, actually.
And do you collect?
So we should collect.
No, that's non-judgmental.
I think we should, like, it's really important to support one another. I think for us it's just been like, we work, a lot of our work is also not on the blockchain, and it's very much, we're always just making works for like institutions, museums and galleries, so
physical things.
Physical things. So it's very hard for us to like, we can't, we have to work towards that as well. But I think we'd definitely like to.
No, I appreciate that. And can I just ask you, as we wrap up, to just give, you know, everyone who's going to be watching this video on Discord and on our various social channels, you know, can you give us an indication, Hannah and Tanya, of how you were inspired by the commission, by the MetaArt Club of A New Beginning? And you don't necessarily have to tell us the whole work or works that you created, but if you can give us an indication of what that spurred in you, it would be really, really wonderful to hear that. Thank you. So
we made this film called Battle of Reality, which so the actual one of the pieces, actually both the pieces are, so both actually the two pieces that are for the MetaArt Club, they're both from this series that we made called The Life Game. And one of the episodes is Battle of Reality. And for that one was looking at like, it's basically, I'm saying it in a really non-linear way, but basically, so one of the pieces is from one of the worlds called Cryptopia, and it's really looking at like the blockchain in relation to like gambling and like the hysteria of it. So it's like, so one of the pieces has like our kind of like dreamy blockchain world that's like, but the blockchain is also gambling machines. And at the end of this film it says, a metaverse is an act of nature, it has no borders, it is a dream born in you today. And that's referencing John Perry Barlow. Let me just check if I've got that right. Maybe Tanya can go to John Perry Barlow, is that it? So John Perry Barlow, who created a declaration of the independence of cyberspace, which I'd really recommend anyone to watch it on YouTube, because he really speaks about how he actually really speaks a lot about self-sovereignty and what we need to protect of the internet to allow us to have what are our rights in the in cyberspace, which really is what is our rights in Web 3.0 as well. And so the piece was a lot inspired by the Declaration of Independence in cyberspace. So once you maybe like see the artwork, it's really good to, maybe you could watch I think you can watch it on like on data, which is like a it's kind of like a streaming site. Tam, how would it?
Yeah, I don't know how to describe it actually.
Okay.
It's kind of like a, like they work specifically with like video art really. So it's very much like, I mean, they have a big online presence and an online platform where you can view and also buy lots of different artists' work. But they don't just exist like online, they also do a lot of stuff physically as well.
Okay,
and you can get a 3 months free subscription, I think. I'm not trying to sell it, but I can just check online. So
No,
yeah, so you can watch all
yeah.
3 pieces on there, and like all 3 episodes from the series. But so that's kind of what one of the pieces is about, and then the other one is the animatic poster for the life game, which is the overall like the whole
overall series.
Yeah, and that's like very much, it just has all the 4 different avatars, which is the same character. So it follows the life of first of me, and then the other character me with mi me, and then into the other avatars ma and mix. So it's kind of like, yeah, it's kind of a anime style poster of the all 4 characters like in a movie, but it's animatic.
Yeah, and with the life game, I guess I just remembered the phrase that we used in the description. It's kind of about like me, the main characters, they like metamorphosize both the unknown and forgotten. So they're basically really just like inside, as the episodes progress, you see them kind of take different turns, but they are just kind of transforming what they know and kind of creating something new. So I think it really fits with this idea of the new beginning. Yeah, I think it fits really nicely actually.
Thank you so much for articulating that in such a beautiful way, Tanya and Hannah. And I just wanted to thank you on behalf of the MetaArt Club for your time today. And I know that our collectors are going to get so much out of this this interview with you both. And I really hope personally to have the opportunity to meet you both again on a podcast, and let's see when we can make that happen. But thank you so much, and we are absolutely delighted to have you as part of the 35 artists that make up the MetaArt Club. And you know, I'm a huge fan of your work, and I know that Frank Smits is too, and we're hugely you know, grateful that you're part of this incredible initiative. So I know that our collectors are going to really love everything that Keiken does. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us. It's an honor to be part of it.
Likewise, thank you. And it's a pleasure
to.
Okay, take care.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.